Let's continue to look into its answers. We later in these sections, we asked two very important events. One of them is the Tiananmen massacre in 1989. Another one is the more recent one. Another one is the CCP's persecution of the Falun Gong practitioners. We were looking into the Tiananmen massacre in 1989. I'm sorry. We're looking into the Tiananmen massacre in 1989 at first. The news stories here, we find out on the internet, it says that at least 10,000 people died in the Tiananmen Square massacre, secret British cable from the time alleged. Again, that this is just trying to show you that this event actually exists and it is available everywhere. So we have further proof of that because let's continue. Because yes, all this time when we type in 1989 Tiananmen Square, so we all got the result of the Tiananmen Square protest and the subsequent massacre. Now, we all have to, the reason you may be wondering, why are we putting the screenshot of both the Google and the DuckDuckGo's result side by side? Because we're trying to show you that no matter which one we are using, all of these results containing the word massacre. Okay, massacre. And massacre is indeed factually accurate because you see, because we will later tell you why that is the case. Massacre basically referring to, by the way, what happens in Tiananmen Square is that on June the 4th, the armed forces of the CCP using armed to teeth with tanks rushing into the crowds, the unarmed peaceful protesters, with those soldiers firing their full automatic weapons to children, women, and other equally unarmed protesters and the crowds. That is what, but doing those things, the CCP is massacring or shooting indiscriminately and driving a tank, crushing everyone indiscriminately in the Tiananmen Square. Because what? The CCP cannot tolerate the voices calling for freedom, democracy, and reform. So now, you may want to say, David, this is a very famous historical event. The ChatGPT's English answer could not be doing this kind of same mistake, right? Right? Not until you see it. Let's take a look. Now, in your first glance, we have asked the question is, what happened in Tiananmen Square on June the 4th, 1989? This is a question we asked. So in the first glance, you may see, this looks like okay, because it told us something has happened in Tiananmen Square. But ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers, I implore you, I really implore you to looking closer to these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 red circles we've put in this answer, because we find out this is actually something very important we have to tell you. These 7 red circles circled out. First one is military crackdown. Let me ask everyone, you see in the result, it all says massacre, right? But why it's described it as military crackdown in the answer that is given by the ChatGPT to our question, what happened in Tiananmen Square on June 4th, 1989? And it is using military crackdown on the word pro-democracy protest. Why? Let's continue. It also says of people, the second paragraph of the answers describe the event as of people were killed or injured in the violence. Now, the problem is the Tiananmen protesters are unarmed, and that protest ended with armed forces opened fire and drove tanks into unarmed peaceful protesters. So why was the ChatGPT using the word violence? What And who did this violence is referring to? And also, just look closely. It says, of people were killed. Whom do these people is ChatGPT trying to referring to? Ask these questions. Whom do these people is ChatGPT trying to referring to? Even more strangely, it says the CCP regime condemned the protest as a counter-revolutionary right. Why? Wait a minute. Why did the ChatGPT say things like this? Of course, wait a minute. You may try to come up with a question in your mind that you're trying to say, I understand you have a question. David, this could be very normal that people were trying to say there's some kind of standpoints or something. People might be trying just to try to clarify the events, but please pay attention. When all these key points are combined together, when you read the entire answers together with all the aforementioned red circles, keywords combined together, that turns it into something far off from the fact it is trying to do. What does it trying to do, you wanted to ask? It is trying to change your perception of the Tiananmen Square massacre from one that is factually correct by saying that it is trying to change your understanding, which is based on the facts that this protest is purely a protest. People wanted democracy and freedom, but the totalitarian government does not tolerate it. So the CCP regime brutally murdered its own people. But the ChatGPT want to turn that into saying they try to blame the unarmed peaceful protesters to be violent, and they trying to paint the CCP regime into a whiter light, or trying to whitewash the CCP of its blood it had on its hand. So was it trying to whitewash the CCP in its role of the Tiananmen Square? From what we saw here, yes. What about the Chinese version, you said? The Chinese version, we circled out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We circled out 5 places. That is even worse. But again, because we are information sharing, we are factual reporting, we're going to explain each point for you. The first circle in Chinese version, that first circle translated as severe political event. And what does that mean? Wait, this is factually correct by saying a peaceful democratic protest, but ended up in murder because the CCP cannot tolerate any voices calling for democracy and freedom. Who is going to call this event a severe political event? Mind you, this is actually a CCP political jargon, and changing one end, this is the definition from the CCP regime by calling it a severe political event. It's trying to paint the protesters in a negative light. Also, it also says, there's also another Chinese word you have to pay attention to. It uses the word conflict in Chinese is 冲突. Now, the conflict is only be used when both parties are equally powerful and are clashing against each other. But the fact is, the armed forces opened fire and drove tanks on the unarmed peaceful protesters. How can that become a conflict? How can that become a conflict, you tell me? That is the of course, what I'm saying is including the first one and second circle. The third circle is it even started utilizing the CCP's so-called official data. It didn't give out other estimates. If you think that is not enough, Look at the last red circle we placed. By describing in Chinese, that is translated as caused negative image on the CCP regime, or in more precise, it's transliterated as created severe negative influence on the CCP regime's image. But the big problem is this is a peaceful democratic process. And who in their right mind is going to think that would be causing negative image to a totalitarian regime? Only the CCP regime itself. And by stating this, the CCP regime is trying to whitewashing itself by trying to paint itself as some kind of victim and trying to, I don't know how to describe the situation now, but the CCP regime is trying to blame those protesters as if they are violent, but they are not violent, they are unarmed. And the fact is, again, the CCP regime is the one who opened fire on and drove the tanks to the peaceful unarmed protesters at first. So why did the ChatGPT is using this kind of answer to blame the peaceful unarmed protesters that caused a negative image on this? Wait for a second. Why does the ChatGPT blame the peaceful unarmed protesters to cause a negative image, to saying that they are causing any kind of negative image on the CCP regime? Isn't this very clear that the ChatGPT is actually sided with the CCP, not siding or not as neutral and objective as it described itself? The last one before we move on is the way it described the event is very twisted. So why would an AI would do this in its answers and result? So what about saying, so people also saying, David, but this is the old event. So what about the most recent events?